Okay, now one of the things we're going to look at next is how you have links between pages. We all know that one of the most useful things about the internet, about the web, is not just the content on pages, but the links from one page to another. A lot of the meaning and a lot of the information is actually in the links between the things. And so here we have an example of a very small page. And here at the bottom, we have a link to the CIT homepage. Now, link has a number of parts. Typically, when a link is displayed on a page, by default, it's in a different color. By default, it's typically blue, depending on the browser. And if you visited the link before, it becomes dark blue. But anyway, usually it's underlined. That's the main way you can tell a link. But as we'll see later in the module, you can actually vary that quite a bit. Now, the link has a couple of different parts to it. It's an anchor tag. A is for anchor. So we have a href equals whatever, blah, 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 blah. We've closed the opening anchor tag. And then here, inside in the anchor tag itself, we have what will appear on the page. So that's the clickable onable bit, for want of a better description. And that's what will appear on the page. Now, here inside in the anchor tag, we open it with an A for anchor, but we're providing more information as well now. We have this href. When you open a tag, when you see a tag being opened and then stuff coming after that, that stuff is a list of attributes. So this anchor tag has a href attribute, we call it. And we're saying href equals double quotes. So it's a single double quote. It's one double quote, not two single quotes. So double quote HTTP, which we know stands for maybe we don't, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP :// and then www.cit.ie. And just for completeness there, I'm putting another slash. You probably don't need that. And then double quotes. So while what's between the beginning and end attributes, anchor tags, right, is what appears on the page, inside in this href attribute here is where it will go when you click on it. So typically, you have to give the full web address of the file that you're looking for. Now, in reality, many websites, if you just say the name of the website, there's a default page that they'll serve up to you if you don't specify the page that you want. So when you go to, so you don't have to go to, www.cit.ie/mainpage.html. It just gives you a default page when you go that far. Now I need to talk a bit about paths, and this is kind of complicated. And actually, it's not that complicated. It's harder to explain than it's actually just go away and do. But so let's say we had two pages on the CIT website, and the first page, its address was www.cit.ie/staff/cm/me.html. Let's say they gave me a folder on the main CIT server. If in that me page, I wanted to have a link that appeared on the page as Collins classes, and when you clicked on it, it takes you to http www.cit.ie/staff/cm/ classes.html. So that's a link from one page to another. So the browser must know the full path, the full web address, the full URL of the web page in order to go get it. You'll notice here, however, that both of these files, both me and classes.html, are in fact in the same place. And this allows us to use a shortcut. Inside in me.html, I could say just classes.html. And then the browser would assume that, well, whatever folder me.html is in, that's where I should go looking for classes.html. So we know that me is in www.cit.ie/staff/cm. It's in that folder. The browser knows that too. So if that web page tells it, go get classes.html, when someone clicks on this, it'll just look for it in the same folder. So it'll look for it in www.cit.ie/staff/cm/classes.html. So that's a shortcut you can use that's quite handy. It also is very handy when you're working on a website, because you can develop it locally on your own machine, get everything working with just those shortcuts, and not worry about what its actual final address is going to be when you put it up on the web. Now, eventually it will have to have, www.whatever.com or something. But you don't even need to know that for definite while you're working on the site. When we give the path of one file relative to the page that's looking for it, we call that a relative path. So if you use the big long name, www.cit.ie, blah, 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 that's an absolute path. When you reference the page you want to go to relative to where you are already, that's a relative path. And relative paths are handy because it allows you to move things around fairly easily without worrying about all the links working or not working. So if CIT was to change to mtu.ie, any absolute links to CIT pages would have to be changed. But any relative links would be fine. It does get a little bit more complicated if you want, and it would be remiss of me not to tell you about this, but you don't need to worry about it too much. Maybe it's something you can come back to and have it sink in later. But with relative paths, okay, you can actually specify quite complex relationships between where you are and where you want to go. So this says here, well, wherever the page is, in that location, there's a folder called staff. So go down into that folder, and in there, there's classes.html. So it's one level underneath where you are now in a folder called staff. To really blow your head, this dot here says go up a level. So you're saying wherever you are now, the page you want to go to is 2 levels up, and then go down a level in the directory system into that folder called staff, and then there's classes.html in there. So it's possible to navigate quite elaborate routes from A to B if you want. You, for the most part, will have everything in the same folder. So you'll just be talking about page 1.html and page 2.html and page 3.html or whatever. What some people do like to do actually is they do like to put all of the graphics, all of the pictures in a separate folder just to keep everything neat and tidy. And so you might choose to do that. But for now anyway, you're not going to worry too much about fairly complex relative paths. You're just going to have a link from page 1 to page 2. So what I would like you to do now is on your first page, I would like you to have a link to the CIT homepage. And then I would also like you to put there on page 1 a link to page 2. And on page 2, I would like you to put a link back to page 1. Okay? So on page 1, you're going to have a link to CIT and a link to page 2. And on page 2, you're going to have a link back to page 1. So any questions on what I want you to do? Now, this link to the CIT page is going to start with http:// because it's an absolute path. But the link from page 1 to page 2 is just going to say href equals quote page 2.html. Now it's important that you know exactly what you called your pages. I know I asked you to save them as page 1.html and page 2.html. Some of you haven't done that. That's not a big deal, but you have to know what you have called it, because you have to specify the exact name. That's why it's a good idea to avoid spaces as well in your file names. Any questions? Cool.